let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Ron Watkins, and I'm a shark ambassador with Sharks for Kids. And if today is your first Shark Talk, you're in for an exciting one. This is actually our 4th week of Shark Talks. Who would have believed we would have been doing this for 4 straight weeks? We've had some amazing talks, and today is not going to disappoint. Again, the Q&A will be open throughout, and the recording will be made available, and I'll give you that information. So for those of you not familiar with Sharks for Kids, we're a bunch of shark enthusiasts, marine biologists, scientists, underwater photographers, videographers, and we work with kids both in school, in person, and do shark sessions, as well as remotely like we're doing today. And the idea is that we teach you more about sharks, their important role that they play in the ocean, and really turn you into a shark advocate as well. I'll be showing at the end of today's presentation our website, where there's all kinds of activities, lesson sheets, and curriculum for you to get more involved in Sharks for Kids, both at home and at school. So with that, let me introduce today's guest, Jeff Milisen, who's going to be talking today about some of the rarest sharks he's ever seen in Hawaii. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, guys. How's it going? I suppose I'll share my screen and get this started?
Yeah, let me give it a little bit more intro. You don't get off that easy, Jeff. So, yeah, Jeff is coming all the way from the big island of Hawaii, where I'm sure it's nice and sunny today, hopefully. Jeff really is one of the most dedicated ocean people I know. He's all about the ocean. To start off with, he's got a master's in marine biology from Hawaii. He also works with NOAA and works for an aquaculture farm, and that's a pretty cool thing. He actually took me out there one day. He's a dive master, so he's really into scuba diving, and he's also an international award-winning underwater photographer. And this year, in fact, in the last couple of years, we've teamed up together along with Renee Capizzola, and we're fortunate enough to win the World Shootout representing Team USA. So he's a very, very good photographer, and I believe one of the best blackwater photographers out there. He was really doing it way before it became popular and really, hit the underwater photo scene. He actually took me out for my first blackwater dive, and it was a blast. Also, Jeff and his beautiful wife, Sarah, are 2 of the nicest people I know, and I'm way overdue for a visit to Hawaii, so when all of this clears up, hopefully I'll be able to come out and visit you guys. So, Jeff, did I miss anything?
When you put it like that, you make me sound like a decent, law-abiding citizen. So
and they have a cute dog named Tipsy, right?
That's right. She's actually here watching this right now. So
great. All right. Well, I'm going to turn things over to you, and I'll put myself on mute and hide my video, and you can share your screen and get started.
All right. Hey, thanks, Ron, and thank you, Jillian, for putting this together. Everybody over at Sharks for Kids. This is a really cool opportunity. Let me figure out this newfangled technology, and we'll get going here. There we are. All right. So have you ever set off to find something incredibly rare? My name's Jeff Milisen, as Ron mentioned, and I do this periodically just for fun. And it usually sets me off on a mission that lasts anywhere between a year and a decade sometimes. And so today we're going to be talking about a few of these sort of adventures that I've launched off on to try and find some of Hawaii's more unusual sharks. So for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, where I came from, some of my humble beginnings and some of my more humble endings. And then we're going to launch into a discussion about Hawaii's hammerheads and I don't know if it's work, but more the fun that I've had with those. Then we're going to talk about tiger sharks, which is a personal kind of quest of mine. Then we're going to go into the night diving, like Ron had mentioned, the blackwater diving that I've been doing a little bit. And then if you guys have enjoyed the talk so far, I'll kind of gauge your temperature, and I've got a little surprise epilogue for you to throw in as well. So, but let's start from the beginning. This is me. Well, okay, the little one in this photo is me. On the left is my mom, and on the right is a northern pike that she had just caught from a boat that she brought me out in. In fact, my grandparents were pretty sure that she was going to drown me by taking me out at this young age in a boat. And fortunately for me and everyone else, that didn't happen. And I went on to do things like, well, I'm a part-time dive master one night a week, just kind of do that for fun. I'm an award-winning underwater photographer. I've got a number of degrees in marine biology from the University of Hawaii at NOAA. While I was going to school at I took on a lot of different projects. On the left, that's me playing with some venomous cone snails, but on the right, that's me tagging a 6-foot sandbar shark in Kaneohe Bay. After graduating, I went on to host a couple of fun programs, basically using any opportunity that I can to stick my nose in the camera, like I guess I'm doing here. On the left, that's me on the set of what was widely touted as the worst Shark Week episode ever. And on the right, that's me this year on the set of Alien Sharks. So I like to think that I've graduated a little bit there. I was also recently on Shark Fest last year for something we'll discuss in a little bit. So anyway, while I was at the University of Hawaii, I was helping out some researchers at a place called the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. It's in a bay called Kaneohe Bay. And what we were doing is we were tagging and learning about Hawaiian brown stingrays, which meant that we had to go out and find some. That meant catching them. So we'd set these long lines of many hooks, and then we'd bring it in. And along the way, in addition to stingrays, it turns out you also catch a lot of other things. In this case, we would catch sandbar sharks and tiger sharks and loads of these baby scalloped hammerheads. Scalloped hammerhead sharks in Hawaii are known to stop by places like Kaneohe Bay, especially Kaneohe Bay, and give birth to up to 10,000 baby hammerheads every year. 10,000 baby hammerheads every year are born in Kaneohe Bay. That's a huge number. And it got me thinking, well, if hammerheads are that prolific here in Hawaii, we know a couple of things about them that should be pretty evident from other places as well. Places like Cocos or Galapagos, Baja California. There was a guy that was studying this phenomenon where the adult hammerheads come by and they form these huge schools, big schools of hundreds of hammerheads at a go. So Peter Klimley was studying these things, and he tagged them, and they would go off into deep water at night to feed. And then every day they would come back and they would form these social groups over top of seamounts and off islands and things like that. So I kind of put two and two together and said, if we have that many hammerheads that they're giving birth to 10,000 baby young every year in Kaneohe, they're probably forming schools somewhere in Hawaii as well. So I kind of set off hoping to find these things. And before I did, I told my dad about this. And I remember my dad wrote the International Shark Attack Files, and they said, hey, my son is doing something that I'm not sure is very smart. Is this a good idea? And they wrote back and they said, yeah, your son should be just fine. Just tell him to be careful. So every time I talk to my dad and do the weekly check-in, he always makes sure that I have all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. And so far, I've checked in intact to date. So anyway, what do we know about hammerheads in Hawaii? Well, we know that every May or June, the adults show up to give birth to young in places like Kaneohe Bay, with smaller numbers also showing up in places like Hilo on the Big Island, that's on the right side of your screen, and also Pearl Harbor, which is on the other side of Oahu. Well, after doing some research, I found that there was a dive company that was advertising a dive off of Molokai where you could go down and see hammerhead sharks every August. So I signed up with these guys, and we went out, we took off into the channel, and that's kind of where you're diving, is right in the middle of very, very big waves and a lot of currents. And then we went down to about 100, 110 feet or so. Lo and behold, we found some adult hammerheads. But they were only like individuals, or up to 5 individuals in a grouping at a time. So these weren't really the schools that I was looking for. Success, they were big sharks, somewhere between 6 and 11 feet long or so, but these weren't the schools of hundreds that I was hoping to find. But so I kept looking, and I kept looking. I looked all over Oahu, I looked all over Maui, and then finally I kind of by chance, moved over to Kona to take up a job. And so I moved over to Kona, and while I was there, I started hearing rumors from people around town that had stumbled across a school of hammerheads. Every once in a while, they didn't know anything about the pattern or where they were when they saw them. So finally, I was out on the water one day, and I had been living here now at this point for a couple of years, and I was out on the water, and I stumbled across this. These are fins of hammerheads, and so we got in the water on these, so there were only like, 4 or 5 different individuals visible from the surface. But when we got in the water, lo and behold, bam, got them. So there were schools of between 40 and 100 different individuals in these groupings that we were finding. And we kept finding them in the same spots. There were some off south. They were always between about 200 and 400 feet deep. But of course, the next big question is, well, what are they doing here? Why are they coming up so close to the surface, and why are they forming these groups? Now, the groups were kind of shown to be a social interaction, but the close to the surface thing was kind of a funny one. And I think the leading hypothesis at this point is that they are hunting very deep, which is in very cold water, and they're only forming these groups, as far as we can tell, between the months of February and April, which on the Big Island of Hawaii are the coldest, the months of the year where the water is the coldest. So here are these sharks going down to this deep, cold water and coming up into still fairly chilly water. So what the leading hypothesis is that these animals are coming up towards the surface to thermoregulate, and that is to warm up after they've been doing their deep dives every night. And that's kind of what I've learned about hammerheads. Now, while I was in Kona, I also started hearing about a shark named Laverne. Laverne is an animal that's rumored to be about 14 feet long, and all of the locals know her because she has a chopped up dorsal fin. This damaged dorsal fin is pretty typical of Laverne. So when you get out of the water and you see a large tiger shark with a chopped up dorsal fin in Kona, you get out of the water and you're like, aha, I saw Laverne. Well, if you do enough dives around the harbor here, you'll do 1 or 2 where you'll see more than one tiger shark at a time. And many of them we found had chopped up dorsal fins. So while we know that there's one particularly big shark that we know of as Laverne, we also have a whole bunch of others out here with this chopped up dorsal fin that seem to meet that same description. So that was, I kind of sent off and asked around my buddies and say, hey guys, do you mind letting me have a look at your photographs of tiger sharks? I'd like to see how many different animals are utilizing this harbor and how many different Lavernes we have here. And what I ended up finding was that there were at least 22 different tiger sharks using the harbor for foraging, of which 14 had some significant damage to their dorsal fin and roughly matched the description of Laverne. So the next time you're out there and you think you're seeing the same animal over and over again, don't just assume. It wouldn't hurt to do some background information or background research and see what you can come up with. So we're going to launch off into kind of my own pet project here. I love plankton, and it wasn't always so. In fact, I was over here on the Big Island looking for hammerheads on one of my first kind of fact-finding trips. And I was out diving for hammerheads, and I had my head in a hole, and my buddy saw 2 hammerheads swim right over my head that I completely missed. So I went back to my friend's place, a little disheveled, and he said, "Look, man, why don't you make yourself feel a little better? Let's go off. We'll do this really cool dive." This is back in 2009, probably before most of you guys were born. And he said, why don't we do this really cool dive called a blackwater dive? Blackwater is where we go out 3, 5, 6 miles offshore, and you jump in the water at night to look at plankton and what are called vertical migrators. Vertical migrators are animals that live very deep during the day because they're hiding from visual predators up near the surface. But every night they come up to the surface to feed off of plankton and other things. So we went off on this dive, and we're out there at night, and we've got my friend and the rest of his family. So his mom and his wife was with him. And we're down on this dive, and the dive master banged on his tank. He made the sign for shark, and he pointed off in the distance, and we saw this. What it took me a moment to realize was that this was an incredibly rare cookie cutter shark. Cookie cutter sharks, for those of you that aren't really familiar, are this animal that's only about a foot long. I don't know if you can see my video right now, but I'm holding one that I found stuck in a net last year. They're only about 1.5 feet long. They fit in this tiny little jar. And they swim around, and they take scoops of flesh, about a golf ball size, out of the chunks of larger prey. So when this tiny little shark was swimming off into the distance, we just thought that was it. Well, it turns out about 5 minutes later, it showed up again, racing at my buddy's back while his back was turned. And I when you're underwater, you can't really say anything because you got a regulator in your mouth, and sound carries differently underwater. So I looked up at his mom, like, how are we going to get this guy's attention? And it turns out she was just buried behind her camera, hoping to get the photograph of her son getting bitten by a tiger shark as well, which was kind of fun. So anyway, in 2009, I wasn't really set up to photograph these things well. But man, that was the coolest encounter I had ever in my entire life. So I set off and I said, I really want a better photo of this thing. And I started doing a lot more night dives. Oh, and if you wanted to see what the telltale sign of a cookie cutter shark bite is, there you go. This is one in the side of a tuna. They also scoop out of things like marlins and bigger sharks, dolphins, whales, that kind of thing. So I set off and I started doing a lot of these blackwater dives, hoping to see another one. And hundreds and hundreds of blackwater dives later, finally, last year, that would have been about 10 years after I originally started looking for these, I was diving with my then girlfriend, now wife, and she pointed off into the distance at another one swimming away from us. I managed to catch up to this one and took a couple of really cool photos of it, which I've been pretty happy with. So you can see those on your screen now. This is a cookie cutter shark. You can tell a couple of cool adaptations for it. It's got these funny little fins that stick out to the side as it swims around. It's got this dark kind of collar across its gills. I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. Those big green eyes, on the other hand, those are highly adapted for seeing in low light environments. These guys are vertical migrators as well, so they never really come up during the day. On their undersides, it's not really visible in these photos. They've got a series of photophores, that is light-producing organs, that they use as a lure to draw in these larger animals to them. And finally, you can see in the bottom right a little bit, most sharks have what's called an anal fin. That's a single solitary fin underneath. Instead, cookie cutter sharks don't. And that's because cookie cutter sharks are a type of, they're squalliforms, so they're a dogfish. So they'll, and that's one of the characteristics of those. So anyway, that was my adventures with cookie cutter sharks. And I saw a number of questions, and it looks like you guys are kind of engaged. So I guess we'll kind of launch off into my epilogue here. This is the kind of afterthought that I had that was super cool. About 10 days after I photographed that cookie cutter shark, I had a really good couple of weeks here. 10 days after I photographed that cookie cutter shark, I had a really good friend on Oahu phone me up, and he said, hey, we found this dead sperm whale off the coast of Oahu, and we got in snorkeling with it and saw this really unusual shark. Can you tell me what it is? And there was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. He knew very well what that was. And I took one look at it. It was white. It was pointy, just like he described. And within a half an hour of him sending me those photos, I had already called out of work the next day and had plane tickets bought to go over to Oahu to play around with them. Because what he had seen was one of these. That's a great white shark on Oahu, which is something that is incredibly rare. That's very, very unusual. I went over to Oahu. I caught the first flight out, and I got in the water early morning. It was pretty chilly in the water that day. And I remember I was in the water for a couple of minutes and nothing was happening. I was getting cold, and I So I told my friend, I was like, I'm going to get out of here and warm up for a little bit. He said, okay. And so I got out, and he said, all right, Jeff, there was another boat there that we didn't really want to alert them to draw too much attention to the sharks that were down there. So he said, all right, Jeff, here's the deal. If I see a great white shark underwater here, the code word will be tiger shark. So I got out of the water, and literally 5 minutes later, he goes, hey, Jeff, there's a tiger shark under the boat. And my first thought, like an idiot, I immediately thought, well, big deal. I see tiger sharks over on the Big Island. Who cares? Of course, I had forgotten our code word, and that was pretty evident a minute or two later when I saw this giant fin show up right next to the sperm whale as this 3-foot snout reached out of the water and started chewing on the sperm whale carcass. So I did something pretty dumb in hindsight, I guess, is I got in the water, and I just wanted to have a look at this thing. We felt pretty safe in the water with this one only because the animal was literally stuffed to the gills with whale fat. There wasn't any more room in this animal to eat anything. In fact, as we were watching him swim around, we noticed that it had coughed up a bunch of big chunks of whale blubber because it just couldn't physically fit them anymore in it. So we felt pretty safe, but this was a very unusual encounter. Please do not try this at home. So we were swimming around with this thing for a while, and then we started hearing these clicks and whistles that were pretty obviously dolphins that were showing up in the distance, and we thought, well, that's kind of an odd place to be. Great white sharks are they're known to feed on marine mammals and dolphins, and they're very active predators. In fact, they're one of the only predators of dolphins. But sure enough, a pair of rough-toothed dolphins showed up and started harassing and escorting this white shark around the whale carcass. And when I asked a cetacean researcher what would they have been doing there, his answer was, well, they're doing kind of the same thing I was doing, and that is using this unusual opportunity of a very stuffed white shark, a white shark that was in no mood to feed anymore, and using this opportunity to learn something about our predator that would otherwise be chasing them around and possibly eating them. So I guess we were doing the same thing that these dolphins were doing. And just to kind of bring things full circle for you guys, if you look in the left flank of this dolphin, you're going to notice a couple of white patches. And those are healing scars from a cookie cutter shark. So that's kind of bringing things around. And also, when we looked in the snout of this sperm whale, we found it was just absolutely pockmarked with cookie cutter scars all over it. So it turns out that cookie cutters kind of follow me around, whether I know it or not. Now, if you enjoyed the talk, I would encourage all you parents out there to check out my book. It should be out in hopefully July. If you want to get a heads up when the book comes out, please shoot me an email or leave a message in the chat. I'll be happy to check those out, and I'll add you to the list. But other than that, I'd welcome any questions that you have. I saw a couple of questions show up here, and I thank you very much for your time.
Hey,
Ron.
Jeff, that was an amazing story about the great white and the cookie cutter, and we did get a lot of questions. Do you want to go ahead and unshare your screen?
Sure. Let me give that a shot here.
We'll have some dialogue here.
How do I do that? I have no idea how to do that.
Little stop video at the bottom. Oh, the unshare is at the top. If you move your cursor up.
There we go. Okay. Oh, there we are. Yep.
Right. Great. So yeah, I'm very, very jealous that you got to swim with that great white and the cookie cutter. So that's really, really cool. One of the questions we actually got was, you've swam with all these really cool sharks. What's the one shark that's high on your list that you haven't seen that you really want to see?
Whew. I'm going to say mako, and there's an asterisk there. Mako sharks are this really cool, small, it's kind of like a miniature great white. And they're this really fast moving, they're the fastest moving shark out there. And I've been to the mainland 3 times trying to swim with a mako, and I've whiffed every single one of those. And then I came back here and I was responsible for all of my guests in the water on one of my blackwater dives. And we had a mako show up. So while I technically swam with a mako, I didn't get a chance to enjoy it because I was responsible for all the people around me. And quite frankly, I had to get them out of the water instead of enjoy the encounter.
Yeah, that's like you, Jeff. You always put your guests and clients and friends ahead of your own satisfaction. But no, the Makos are cool, and I'm sure when Joe was out there, Joe and Lauren, they told you all about them.
Oh yeah.
So another question that we got was, how did you get into marine biology? So what did you do to get to where you are, and why do you like it so much?
So I went to school for marine biology, and if you want to get into it, that's how you get into it. Go to school, go to college. I really enjoyed my time at University of Hawaii at Manoa, but in particular, when you're there, there's a lot of people going for marine biology. So if you really want to stand out, just going to classes and doing well in classes, that's important, but it's as important that you go off and you do internships and you work in the field and you get some real experience. You really have to apply yourself 120% all of the time. So while I was at the university, I was learning to scuba dive. I was taking their university scuba diving course. I was working for the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. I was helping out with other labs, all while doing my homework and handing that in on time, well enough that I went to grad school and did that whole thing. So in other words, it's a very competitive field. It's difficult to get into, but it's very rewarding once you're here. I love what I do. Every day I get to go out on the water and dive and fix things and work with wildlife. That's a lot of fun, but it does take a lot of work to get to that point.
No, that's really good advice. People, even younger kids, just getting involved in something, well before you're getting close to college, learning more about some subjects, getting involved with sharks or whatever it is, your interests are. And then obviously the sciences and math is pretty important as well. And how long have you been doing this, marine biology? And
let's see, I started working with like the hammerheads and all that. That was back in 2007 when I was working at HIMB. I graduated with my undergrad in 2009, and then I graduated with a master's in 2012.
Okay. So yeah, quite a while, and you don't see any career change in the future, do you?
I don't think so.
Great. No, that's fantastic. A lot of concern for Laverne and the other sharks with the tail damage, the dorsal fin damage. And any idea how those damaged dorsal fins may occur? Or
so the ideas around town are that they could be mating scars, although that's kind of a weird spot for them to be.
Yeah.
But when sharks get together and they mate, they can be very, very rough with each other. The male needs to bite onto the female, and that can get pretty gnarly. The area also kind of brings them up into shallow water, so boats not really knowing what they're doing as they pass through that channel. I suspect that as the sharks get bigger, they don't fit in this channel as well, and so the boats, as they pass over, maybe kind of propping the dorsal fins on the animals. But to be honest, there's a fair amount of these animals' lives that we don't get to see. So all of these are just kind of guesses that we can't really, we don't know for certain.
Yeah, no, it's true. Unlike whales and other mammals that come up, the sharks, they're underwater, so we don't really get to see them as much and don't know as much about them. And one of the questions was around what can I do, and I'll assume this is from a younger kid, what can I do to help sharks? And just from Sharks for Kids standpoint, we always encourage learning as much as you can about them, and making sure that people understand sharks and not all of the fake stuff that you hear about them in the media. But what's your advice? How can people, wherever they live, maybe help sharks or get more involved with sharks?
Well, there's a lot of ways. First and foremost is I say pay attention to your seafood. Seafood is very important to a lot of us. but some forms are far more sustainable than others as far as their impacts on not just that one particular species, but also in the bycatch. And that's when you set a long line, for example, you catch your tuna, but you also catch other species as well. And those other species are called bycatch, and they don't tend to get used as much. So if you choose sustainably sourced seafood, learn about your seafood, and go with sustainable choices. I also, if you want to get a little bit more active in it, find a group that's doing things like beach cleanups. I love those, and they can do an awful lot of good. I've come across a number of nets offshore with entangled marine life in it, and these are just ghost nets. These are leftover scraps of fishing nets that just drift through the open ocean, constantly catching marine life. In fact, that's where I caught this. This is a cookie cutter shark that I found in a ghost net. So that was just a fortunate thing. But honestly, the more we clean up our oceans, the happier the wildlife there will be.
Yep, no, that's great. And try to reduce plastic and other debris like that. That's great. There was a question about the cookie cutter shark, and does it use like a bioluminescence to generate that light? How does that work?
Yeah, so they and to be honest, I'm not. It's been a while since I've read up on this, so some of the details on it are fuzzy. But what they do is they harbor a type of bacteria in their skin, and the bacteria is what produces the bioluminescence. Other animals out there do similar things. I'm thinking in terms of like squid, lanternfish. In fact, I saw one figure where as much as 70 or more percent of the ocean's inhabitants produce some form of bioluminescence. Squids actually have taken this a step further to be able to, they have the culture of bacteria in this little pore, and then they can close and open the pore to produce an amount of light that matches the amount of light coming from the moon exactly, so that they can, when they drift across in front of a moon, they just blend in like camouflage. It's called I can't remember the term off the top of my head. I'm very sorry, everyone.
No, that's pretty fascinating that they use that bacteria. I think that answers that question. And then the hammerheads. A lot of people were interested in the hammerhead sightings that you've had, and was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what those hammers are used for. Someone asked, do they use their hammers to fight? Why did they have that hammerhead shape?
Sure. So sharks have these sensory organs called ampullae of Lorenzini, and they help spread out, or they help detect electrical impulses in the water. So some sharks rely on these more than others. And what the hammerhead's wide snout does is it spreads those out over a larger area, kind of like, I think like a radar dish or something. So they've got this huge surface area of ampullae of Lorenzini. So as they're going over the sand, it gives them kind of this scanning head that they can then find their prey that's going to be buried underneath the sand. Now, hammerheads will also use these in a different way, in that they can follow the magnetic impulses of the Earth in much the same way that like a helicopter will. So it was described as navigating like an airplane versus a helicopter. An airplane will pick a cardinal direction and just fly straight to a destination, whereas helicopters, you'll see them roughly following roads and things. So they'll follow landmarks visually on the bottom. So the hammerhead is looking for these magnetic lines of basalt that run along the ocean floor, and then switching lanes to help kind of find where it's at and find its way back to the seamounts during the day or back to the hunting grounds at night.
And with those eyes, they have that 360 degree vision superpower, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I know Jillian and Jenny they've both given talks on adaptation and how sharks have adapted to be the shape and be how they are for all different types of species. And that's on our website as well. So definitely check that out to learn more. And then lots of questions, and we always get these questions about, have you ever been bit, or was your friend bit? How do you know that a shark is aggressive or not, or whatever, is it safe to go in with them?
So I know, like the shark is the big scary word, right? Like that's supposed to be the underwater boogeyman, but quite honestly, I've never been bit. Um, I know what two people have, but I know a lot of people who have spent a lot of time in the water with sharks, so it's kind of a not a big deal. The only thing I've been bit by was an eel, and I'm gonna. This
All
is
right.
gonna look weird. I've got a scar in my leg, and it's difficult to be dignified and show it to you. I've got a scar in my leg from a pretty good eel bite.
Oh.
But no, sharks are. You should never feel like I don't know. Watch them, but use your head.
Yeah, show them respect. And then later this week, we actually have Paul DeGelder's going to be talking, and he was bit by a shark, and he's going to tell you his story. And he's one of the biggest shark advocates out there now. And how, many of sharks really attack and kill maybe 10 people on average a year, and we kill way over 100 millions of sharks. So they should be a lot more scared of us than we are of them. So again, that goes along with the education and just learning about sharks and learning. We also had a talk earlier about reading shark behavior and how they can sort of let you know if they're a little agitated and nervous around you. So then the one last question we had is, do you know of any specific programs, and I get asked this a lot, so I figured I would ask you too, but do you know any specific programs that people, I'm assuming if they're in high school getting ready to go into college or maybe starting college, where they could look to try to get more involved in some marine biology type activities? Any recommendations?
What I would do is look at your universities and look at the ones where you're looking to apply, because they tend to be full of resources. And if you're already helping out, if you're kind of working as an undergraduate with a researcher, that looks really good on your college application as you're moving forward. So that'd be a really neat way to. I'm working with an undergraduate right now with box jellyfish on the Blackwater dives. So check that out. Some of those, sometimes you'll write them and they won't have anything, but sometimes you'll write them and they'll be more than happy to encourage and give you something to do that is that'll help you later. So just a little project or something. Yeah,
and sometimes local science centers or aquariums. I think did you work in an aquarium at one time, Jeff?
I worked at a couple. I worked at the Odyssey at the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. The Odyssey is no longer there. And the Waikiki Aquarium on Oahu.
So that's a good way to do that. All right, so the last question we have is, why do you like sharks, and what's your favorite shark?
Yes. Oh, I love that one. I don't know why I like sharks so much, except that it's like a tuna. When you look at a tuna, every piece of this thing has evolved to be the fastest possible fish in the sea. So their eyes are flattened against their head. They have no scales. So they're slippery as they go through the water. They have all these little finlets and things to reduce drag. And, they even have little slots that each of their fins fit into so that they can just become this football that slides through the water. Sharks are the same way. Every little piece of these things has been evolved to be to do what they do to the best of their ability. They're super streamlined, super slick. They have these denticles that face backwards that make them just super slippery through the water. And because they're so highly evolved, they've remained relatively unchanged through thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So that's something that's worthwhile studying. How is this animal so successful? It's fascinating. And when you're in the water with one, they have this real commanding presence. They're you shouldn't ignore them, but they're really difficult to ignore when you're in the water with them, because they're such a magnanimous animal. So definitely my favorite to swim with, my favorite dive buddy. As far as my favorite species out there, I'd go with probably the oceanic white-tip shark. This is an open ocean animal. that lives in basically a watery desert. Because if you spend a lot of time in the open pelagic ocean, the water is incredibly clear because there's not a lot in it. It's not a very productive section of the planet. But here's an apex predator that spends its life out there. And so they just imagine being this huge calorie-hungry animal living in a desert. There's not a lot out there for them, right? Which is incredibly respectful. And that's why they're so curious. That's why they swim up to divers. That's why they swim up to fish hooks and bite a hold of fish hooks. And that's part of the reason that they're so popular in the shark fin trade. In the 1950s, oceanic whitetips were probably the most abundant large animal on Earth. If you flash forward to today, more than 95% of those oceanic whitetips have been removed from the ocean and are no longer there. So here's an animal that was highly successful until the heavy hand of humans laid upon them. And now today they're listed as endangered according to the IUCN. They're threatened according to the endangered species list, and they're listed on CITES Appendix 2, which restricts their the ability to trade in their parts over country lines. So yeah, I'd say oceanic whitetips.
Yeah, you've got some amazing photos of oceanic whitetips too. You've had some great encounters out there, and I know you could probably go on for another hour of all the different sharks and critters that you've encountered. But just wanted to thank you, both from Jillian and I and the group of Sharks for Kids. I think everyone really found your talk today fascinating. Just judging from the questions that we got and how many attendants that we got, and they stayed on. So everyone was really engaged. And just wanted to thank you and wishing you and Sarah the best, and stay safe out there.
Hey, thanks, Ron, Jillian, you too, guys. Stay healthy, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Yep. Sharks for Kids, guys.
Thank you, Jeff. Now I'm going to share my screen. I wanted to show everyone, if you missed part of this one or wanted to watch it again, where you can go to actually get this information. Okay. So now you can see this is our website here. So when you go to sharks4kids.com, this is where you'll land. You'll land here on the main web page, and you can scroll around, see a little bit about us, how to contact us. If you like the content, you can obviously donate. But look at how many people we've actually been able to reach. Over 128,000 students, either in person or through web meetings like this, across many, many countries. So we really do a lot of outreach. And if you're interested in learning about the webinars, under the education section, there's a webinar. And there's also other things under education, like 3D models, which are really cool. We had a presentation on those. And here you can see the one that we just had with Jeff. And then this link later will be a link like this that says watch on YouTube. And that'll allow you to watch the presentation on YouTube. Some other interesting things, since you guys are at home, if you get bored, there's lots of activities. Parents can go up here and download entire curriculum and teach their kids about sharks. There's coloring sheets, fact sheets. There's lots of crafts. So if you have some spare time and want to have some fun, there's some really cool things on here about Tilly the tiger shark. I've actually made this one. It's pretty fun. And then there's some coloring sheets on here. There's how to draw a tiger shark, which we have videos for that as well. So, Jeff, maybe you can learn how to draw one of these tiger sharks too. They're pretty cool. And a hammerhead. So fun ways to get involved with sharks. So wanted to thank everyone for joining today's Sharks for Kids. And please check out our lineup of webinars. Like I said, we have a lot more this week, and hope to see you next time. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, everyone.